Okay, I forgot to start record, so I'm going to try to summarize the first 2 minutes in about 30 seconds. One of the topics today I'm going to talk about is publishing your own website. You want to publish your own website? Well, for a lot of reasons. To practice what you've learned, to put into practice what you've learned. As with anything, if you have a skill, if you don't practice it, the skill is going to diminish over time. So you leave this class and you don't do any kind of web development at all, your skills are going to become rusty. Developing your own projects helps you keep up to date because you may always want to integrate new features into your website, and that allows you to continue to learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And another big thing is it would be a real plus if you went looking for a job for employers to see that you have done some work outside of the classroom. That's one thing that employers consistently tell me that they're looking for in students, is students that go beyond just the classroom material and put into practice what they've learned in creating their own website or doing something like that, creating your own mobile app, creating your own desktop application, whatever. But the nice thing about web development is you can show it to anyone at any time because it's available on the web. All right. Along those lines, I would also encourage you to consider taking the work-based learning class that is offered here, and to contact Career Services to look into that. All right, so I think that's most of what I said in the first unrecorded minutes. Let's look about how to publish a website. Oh, one other thing, put your portfolio online. Although you might want to change it up a little bit from what you turned in class. You might want to, for example, not have all your assignments on there, but pick 2 or 3 of what you thought your better assignments were and include those in the portfolio. Okay, how to publish a website, the complete guide for beginners. First off, select your publishing option. What this relates to is how are you going to make your web pages, right? Because there's more than one way to make your web pages. Right? We studied probably the most basic fundamental one. You write them yourself. You code them yourself. You code the HTML, CSS, and as we're going to start looking into today, the JavaScript. The advantage that offers to you is that it gives you complete flexibility to do whatever you want web-wise, right? Some of the other options, you don't necessarily have the flexibility, and it becomes very difficult for you to maybe do something that you know how to code very easily, but because you're using some other software, there are restrictions put on it that make it difficult for you to do everything that you might want to do. So first way to publish your website is by creating the code just like we've done for this class. The second one is a website builder. The advantage of this is it's quick. It's a drag and drop thing. I work on a website for an organization, and they use GoDaddy's website builder. And really, working on it is like not much different than working on Word. You want to insert an image, you click on the image icon, and it creates an image for you. Right mouse on it and set some properties, and there you go. Even people that can't code could use something like this to create a website. What's the advantage of it? It's quick, and it's usually pretty expensive, and it's easy. Well, why wouldn't you do that then? Well, as I mentioned before, you lose some flexibility with that. There's a lot of things that I want to do, but I know I could write in 2 or 3 lines of CSS code to accomplish something that's very difficult to do using the website builder. So therefore, you're limited in what you can do. And especially if you were working and you wanted to showcase your skills as a web developer, you want to show that you really know the coding, really know the HTML and CSS. So, well, this is a possibility. This is more of a possibility in my mind for people that don't know how to code and want to create a website for their small organization. Another thing you can use is a content management system. That's something like WordPress. Maybe some of you have heard that. That is a system where you have templates that are done in HTML and JavaScript and CSS, and you can create pages that use that template and substitute your own content for the template. And that, in a way, is sort of a hybrid of the first two methods, because you can actually buy a template, or you can find a free template to save you with the HTML and CSS, but you could make custom changes to it if you didn't like the way it worked, right? And you can create entries, and you can insert your own HTML and things like that in there. So that's sort of in between. According to this chart, which I'm not sure how up to date it is, WordPress has approximately half of the people that use content management systems. 42% use WordPress, so that's among the most popular. And again, as I mentioned, combination. Depending on the particular tools that you use, you can sometimes put your own code in them. All right, prepare your website content. We've already sort of talked about that when we've talked about designing our website. This is what I'm talking about. This would be where you identify your goals, identify the goals of the people visiting your website. If it's a personal website to market yourself, your goals might be to get a job, right? To be able to showcase your skills. So to get a job might be your number one goal, right? And why might people be visiting the site? Well, they might be visiting it to see if they want to hire you, right? Now, even in getting a job, there's slightly different shades of that. One is you might want to get employment with a company. So I want to go and work for American Greetings and be part of their web development team. Or maybe you're becoming a consultant, right? Where you take on jobs from different people, and you might want someone to hire you as a consultant to bring you in. So there would be slightly different goals in that case as well, right? They suggest some other things beyond what we talked about. They talk a little bit about search engine optimization, which is a great topic. And something that if you're creating a website, you might want to look into. Next thing, choose a name for your website. The best names that you can pick are memorable and are short, right? Would say that's the two criteria for that. Memorable and short. Ideally, maybe your name would work, right? If there's no one else that has registered that domain, right? Once you decide on a domain, you register that domain. That allows you to, that prevents rather from anyone else for using your domain name. So for example, no, you couldn't use the domain google.com. There's already a google.com, right? And therefore, that is, the domain registers make sure that the domain that you're registering is unique. One thing that the domain registers will do is when you get a hosting option for this site, when you actually put it on the web, you have an IP address associated with your website. Well, the domain domain name service will be updated to say, hey, this website name connects to this IP address, because it's the IP address that's actually used networking wise to connect to your machine. Any of you who's taken a networking course might have covered that in more detail. But you know, an IP address is 4 3-digit numbers, or no, three 4-digit numbers. All right, and that can be really tough for people to remember. It's much easier to remember google.com or whatever. using images, video content, mapping your content strategy. Some of these things we talked about when we talked about personas. Your website audience isn't made of just one type of person. Well, even something simple as marketing yourself, there would be employers that might want to hire you, and there might be people that want to contact you to do a job of theirs. So they might want to hire you as a consultant if you're open to that. A third possible audience would be employment agencies that are looking for someone that has that particular job skills that's desired. So those are really three different groups that you could be marketing to. Quality control, grammar check, spelling check. I know those things, I've known brilliant people that couldn't spell very well. Your spelling skills really doesn't necessarily have anything to do with your intelligence, but people will see that and get an impression for you if words aren't spelled correctly. So therefore, copy and paste your content into Google and look at it and see if their spell check finds any errors or grammatical errors. All right, that's important to do, right? You're trying to present a professional image to these other organizations or employers. So therefore, your credibility is enhanced by having correct spelling and correct grammar. We talk about building wireframes, which we talked about in this class, design and look and feel, which we talked about in this class, navigation, hosting the site. Hosting the site is where you're going to actually put up your web pages to the web. For example, the web pages that you've done in this class aren't accessible through the web. They live on your computer, but no one else can access them. Only your computer can access them. How do you make your web pages accessible? You make them accessible by putting them on a web server, right? Servers are computer systems that take requests and respond to them. So in the case of web pages, a request is requesting a specific URL. Like I type in www.google.com, right? I do that. Some magic happens through the internet. In other words, they look up the IP address of google.com and they route the request to that web server. And the Google web server responds by giving you back a web page. That's typically how the requests work. Ask for a URL, get back a web page. Now, there's web hosting companies that you can use. And there's such a thing as shared hosting. Shared hosting is where one server handles multiple websites. This is the least expensive option, shared hosting. If you're developing, say, a personal site, you're probably not going to get thousands of hits per day, right? So shared hosting probably would be adequate for you. If you were developing a website for an organization and you thought that it could generate a lot of traffic, then maybe you'd consider what's called dedicated hosting, where the web hosting company has one server dedicated just to you and your organization. Another option is do it yourself. Managed hosting is usually done through web hosting companies where they manage stuff for you. You could do it yourself. What does that mean? That means you could install the proper software on your computer or one of your computers, register that computer's IP address with the domain name service, and then have your computer connected to the internet and have it open and accessible 24/7 for people to access your website. I would not recommend that unless you're an organization that has an IT department. Things such as security patches, where if there's a bug found in the web server software, those are typically handled by the web hosting organization. That's why you use a web hosting organization, so you don't have to worry about those kinds of security issues. They should take care of them for you. All right. But if you're part of an organization, a larger organization with a information technology department, you might decide to host it yourself. Finally, you upload files. So let's say you hire your web server, your web hosting company. In fact, let's draw a picture. All right. Here you are on your computer working on your web pages. They're on your disk. You're working and you're using Visual Studio Code or whatever to work on and update those files. So you decide you want to publish your website. What you will do is you will contact a web hosting company. It's going to provide a server for you. And they have their own disk with all the necessary files. Now that's going to be connected to the internet, and it's going to be listening for requests. Now, if you're connected to the internet, that doesn't mean that you're a web server. You need the special software to make you a web server. But your web hosting company has that software and is connected through the cloud, through the internet, clients. And the clients request a page by putting in the URL. The internet does its job. It uses the domain name server to find your IP address, sends requests to the proper web server, and you send back a web page to the client. Now, the question is how do you get stuff from here to here? Sometimes a web hosting company will have a program called cPanel, right, or something similar, a control panel that will allow you to upload stuff. So that will allow you to take stuff from your disk and put it up the web host disk to make it accessible. Even if it's a shared host, you're going to have a directory on that shared host, that shared server, that you put your stuff in to make it accessible. You know, you'll create folders. I talked a little bit about creating folders in this class. You'll create all those folders and put stuff in their respective folders. The old school way to do it is by using what's called an FTP program. And FTP is another program that allows you to connect your computer to a web host. Allows you to take stuff from your disk, put it on their disk. Test the site. Before you launch, make sure you test your site. What does that mean? All right. Well, I'm going to talk about a simple site, then I'll talk about a more complex site. On a simple site like a portfolio, which might just be plain old HTML, you know, you'd visit each of the pages. You would make sure all the links worked on your site. You'd make sure all the images displayed correctly. And you wouldn't just do that on your computer. Ideally, you would either have multiple kinds of computers or have friends that have multiple kinds of computers. Like whenever I launch a site, what I do is I send a message out to my friends. Hey, can you go and look at this site and see if it works on your machine? Because one person might be accessing it on a Mac using Safari. Another person might be accessing it on a Windows machine using Microsoft Edge. A third person might be using Google Chrome. Another person may be using their phone to access the site. Well, that's the one tough thing about web development is you don't know, you have no control over how people are accessing your site. Therefore, you want to do your best to thoroughly test it in all possibilities so that everyone is covered. And we talked about how to create a different website, a different appearance of your website for a mobile device versus a desktop device. Fortunately, browser compatibility is a much smaller issue than it used to be. When I first began web development in the late 20th century, web browser compatibility was a huge issue, right? And you really had to test stuff to work. And you did some horrible things in your code to make sure it worked. Like you would write sections of your code that worked for one browser and write a second section of the code that was used by another browser, which is always a bad practice to do. You want one set of code that does everything. It's funny, test your site is given one tiny paragraph. That's a big deal, all right? A lot of effort should be put towards that. Because you know what's going to happen? Like, let's say you have a link to download your resume on your personal site. If you click that link and your resume doesn't download, what is the employer going to do? Are they going to email you and contact you and say, hey, look, I tried to download your resume? No. Go to the next candidate, right? And think about that even on commercial sites. If you're on a commercial site and you have a hard time ordering a product, you're simply going to go to a competitor, right? If I can't find it on website A, or I can't order it easily on website A, forget that. I probably won't go and contact them and tell them that there's an error, there's a problem. I'll just go and use a competitor, right? So testing is critical. Now, if you're on a more complex website, like an e-commerce site where you can order products and all that, you would want to test all the different things that a user can do. You know, order a product, query customer service, you know, delete an item from an order, add an item to an order, substitute an item in the order, put in their credit card information. What happens if you try to put in invalid credit card information? All that kind of things. You would test every possibility, and you develop an extensive test plan to test all the possible transactions. Publish your site. Plan for the future. It's important to keep your site updated. All right. The site that I took over controlling had that problem. Their site was maybe 6 months, maybe 8 months out of date. So it hadn't been updated in 6 or 8 months. People go and visit your site and see that it's 6 or 8 months out of date. They might think, well, look, that maybe that company's out of business now, right? Therefore, you would want to periodically update your website and new content. Maybe on your website you have a little journal that talks about some of the things that you're working on, right? You could do that, and in that way, you let people know that, hey, you're out there and you're updating this site. There's other things like ads and all that you can do. Search engine optimization, social media strategy, and all that. But I did want to at least cover like how you would go about taking a site from your computer live. Register a domain, hire a web hosting company, transfer your files from your machine to the web hosting company is sort of the too long didn't read version of it. All right. The last topic that we're going to study in this class, because we have 3 weeks left, including today. After today, we will have 2 weeks left. The last topic we're going to study is JavaScript. Now, we don't have enough time to make you a JavaScript expert. That's not the point of this class. But the point of this class is to expose you to JavaScript and give you a basic understanding of what it is used for, right? It sort of completes sort of a client-side triangle. There's HTML, the content of the site. CSS, that's the appearance, layout. let's say HTML is the content and the organization. Of course, these things interact. The third component is JavaScript. Now, JavaScript is not Java. It's like Java, but it's not Java. And JavaScript is responsible for the behavior of a page. Interactivity. And that, again, it's connected to the HTML, the CSS. Let me show you an example that I use a lot of times when I'm debuting JavaScript. Well, let's look at the ESPN page. All right, notice what their navigation is. It shows NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, NHL, soccer, golf, and etc. Notice what happens when I put my mouse on one of those menu selections. Boom, I get a submenu. Take the mouse off, I get rid of that. I want you to notice a couple things about this. First of all, when I load a page, notice how you see stuff down there? It's indicating what page is being loaded and all that. You don't get that when you put your mouse over something. In addition, it happens immediately. Look how long it takes to load this page. And if we were on a slower internet connection, it would take even longer. But you see a little flash there, right? It didn't take long, but you could see that it did something. Whereas with these, there's no little flash and there's nothing. Well, it's showing you the link down there, but it's not loading anything new. That's because JavaScript, along with CSS and HTML, is delivered to the client from the web server when you request a page. So when I request this web page, I get 3 kinds of code, 3 different languages. I get the HTML code, which contains this headline, content, links, video, all that kind of stuff. It contains the CSS, which stylizes it, which chooses what font to use, what chooses, what color links are, where the navigation is. Where the left side navigation is, where the top headlines appear. Top headlines doesn't have to appear here. I could put them across the top of the page, but CSS tells it to put it there. The third thing I get besides the HTML and CSS is JavaScript, which handles the behavior or interactivity. And what I'm defining as interactivity is that you do something, you as a user does something, and the page does something back. So I put my mouse over this menu selection, the page responds to you instantly by displaying this submenu. Now let's think of the implication of that. That means that all these menus up here were downloaded first time the page was loaded, right? They're just made through CSS to be invisible. And when we put our mouse over it, we make them visible. Take our mouse out, it becomes invisible. So on down the line. If you looked at Learning Communities webpage, it's similar. My mouse over that, that appears. All these menus got downloaded when that page loaded the first time. But through CSS, they're made invisible. this allows us to show each one of them. Now, it would take a lot to study this page because there's a lot going on this page. So we're going to look at a real small example that does something similar. Let me go and edit this real quick. Copy of it. This is just do the basic stuff here. Example. Now, let's look at that. Look at this page. All right, who is Luke Skywalker's father? And we all know that it was Yoda. So this page shows spoilers. When the page initially loads, we have a block of HTML that is invisible. Right? When we click the show spoiler button, block of HTML code becomes visible. Likewise, who shot first? John shot first. All right, let's look how we do this. First of all, let's examine how this looks when the page initially loads. I have these paragraphs that have a class of spoiler. Why do you give things a class? You give things a class if there's multiple things that you want to treat the same way. But when the page loads, I want to hide all the spoilers, right? So therefore, I give all these paragraphs the class of spoiler. In CSS, then, I say any paragraph that has a class of spoiler, don't display it. Display type is none. I can make something displayed block, inline, none, inline block, which is sort of a hybrid between the two. But if I say display none, that's not going to display this at all. So that's what we get when we initially load this page. These two paragraphs, the class of spoiler, and therefore they don't show. Now, what happens when we click the button? First of all, these are not submit buttons. These are just plain old buttons. We're not sending the data to a server. In fact, the whole advantage of doing things JavaScript is that we take care of it on the client side without having to go to the server to get a new copy of the page. We have an onClick property that has the code that executes when the button is clicked. So onClick equals, and then we have this line of code between the quotes. All right, let's look at what this does. Document. Document means is that we're going to do something on this web page. Not doing something on a pop-up window or something like that. We're doing something right on this web page. Get element by ID says, find me the thing that has the ID of spoiler 1. What has an ID of spoiler 1? This paragraph does. I'm going to do something to its style. What am I going to do to the style? I'm going to set the display property. And what am I setting the display property to? I'm setting it to block. This is a very common pattern in client-side JavaScript. The user does something, it's called an event. And it can be handled through an onClick attribute. That onClick event has JavaScript statement in it. And it uses what's called the DOM, or Document Object Model, to point to different things on the page that you want to change. So for example, in this case, document get element by ID, that finds a thing on the page that has this for an ID. Change the style, change the display, change it to block. We're going to see that pattern over and over again. Now, one thing to notice, using single quotes here. Why am I using single quotes there? I'm using single quotes because the double quotes are used to delineate the beginning and end of the JavaScript statement. If I use a double quote here, it would think that's the end of the JavaScript statement and give me an error. One thing about JavaScript is it's very sensitive. HTML, it doesn't matter if you use a capital P for paragraph or a lowercase p. It's going to work the same. Here, however, if I say get element by ID, I make it an uppercase D. Not going to work. How do you know what happened? Well, one thing you can do is look at these three dots if you're running Chrome. More tools, developer tools. And if you click at the console, it says that document get element by ID is not a function. And you might think, well, of course it is. We learned about that in class today. Well, we learned about it in class today, except there's a lowercase d. I would have to go and correct that to lowercase d. Now, the code to hide the second spoiler is the same. What's the difference? The difference is the ID that we want to change the style of. This one, we find the thing that has an ID of spoiler 2. This one. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to change the style. We're going to change the display property to black when we click on this second button. Now, I also have here a button to change the color of the question to yellow. Same thing. We have an event. We click on it. We find the thing on the page that has an ID of option 1. We're going to change its style by saying style background color equals yellow. Now, the one thing is in CSS code, it's background color like this. We don't use dashes in JavaScript. We just make, wherever there's a dash, we make the letter following it capital. So this allows us to, if we want to, change the color of that question. I realize these are small things and all that, but they're going to build to bigger things. What I want to get down for this class is a basic pattern. We're going to use the DOM to change particular things about an element on the web page. We could change anything about it. We could change its font size if we wanted to. change the style of that question, and I'm going to change font size. It's a nice thing of using Visual Studio Code, by the way, is it gives you little reminders. Click that. Doesn't know what font size of yellow means. CM is when it knows font size. Get bigger. We have another one to make it smaller again if we wanted to. So what do we have? We have user events. We have the DOM that allows us to look and find things on the page. And we're going to change those things on the page, either the style or the HTML. Right? In this case, we're changing the style of the thing that we find. For the first several examples, get element by ID is going to be a workhorse, because we're going to use that probably in every example. There's other ways to access stuff on the page besides get element by ID. It's a very useful one, especially as we're starting. Questions? That's what I had today. Next week, we'll continue with JavaScript for next week, and then we'll see where we sit for week 15.